it's Nerdy, and welcome back to the Transmissions Draft League, Season number 4. Today we are kicking off the Season 4 playoffs with our quarterfinal match versus the New York Pokerangers and my good friend Adalov as their coach. We have got a very interesting game here, and a part of me really wishes that I had recorded the team building perspective on this team, but instead you will just have to get a little bit more in-depth of a team breakdown, as I do think that it's worth for these playoff games to go a little bit more further into the actual thought process behind a lot of these builds, just so that we can get an idea of where the competitive mindset is at for a lot of these picks. To start off, I have a Pokemon that I think breaks this game wide open, and that is going to be Ogerpon Cornerstone. So as you all know, the Pokerangers do have Ogerpon Hearthflame, which has been their best Pokemon by a long shot this season. Of course, there have been a couple of other good standout Pokemon. However, that does mean that this is a bit of a mirror match. However, it is not exactly a mirror match, and this is why. Cornerstone actually matches up insanely well into Hearthflame. One, they speed tie, which does mean that we at least give ourselves a 50-50 shot to outspeed our opponent's Hearthflame. However, it's a little bit better than 50-50, as we do have pretty good speed control, and on top of that, we do also have redirection support. So it's not like our Cornerstone is banking on a coin flip to outspeed our opponent's Pokemon. However, the other part of this that is really important is that Cornerstone actually has an insanely good offensive type in this matchup. Namely, just being that Ivy Cudgel is absurdly strong. And Ivy Cudgel from Ogerpon does guarantee knockout just about everything on our opponent's team. And with Terra Rock, it can guarantee to KO even more. So if we look at our opponent's team, we have got Fluttermane, Illumise, Hearthflame, Staraptor, Meowstic, Rhyperior, Bisharp, Milotic, and Oricorio. That is 8 Pokemon on our opponent's team that get threatened to be one-hit KO'd by this Pokemon with a Terra Rock, Ivy Cudgel, or a Power Whip, or by our coverage move, Low Kick. That, of course, being for the Bisharp. The only Pokemon that we cannot guarantee to OHKO is actually the Persian Alola, and even that Pokemon still takes a ton of damage from our Terra Rock Ivy Cudgels. The only reason that Persian doesn't drop to that is because of Fur Coat, which is, of course, a good ability in the matchup. That being said, the fact that we can KO so much of Ada's team with just one Pokemon does mean that a very well-positioned Ogerpon Cornerstone is going to be able to really tear through our opponent's team, and that's just with one Pokemon. Of course, the rest of our team is still incredibly aggressive and super capable of taking over the game, and so that's where we are going to talk about the rest of the team. So we have a NDDF here with Psychic Seed and Terra Fire. Obviously, our opponent's best offensive Pokemon being Fluttermane and Hearthflame does mean that Terra Fire is a really good defensive type. It resists the fairy moves from Fluttermane. It resists both the fire and grass moves from Hearthflame. The only trade-off, of course, is that we become weak to the rock moves from Rhyperior. Not that big of a deal. The other thing, by the way, that I did want to mention with Cornerstone is that because it does force a Terra on Rhyperior, we can basically bank on the fact that if our opponent wants to lean into Rhyperior, then the Terra cannot be actually used on either of the two more dangerous offensive threats that our opponent has in Fluttermane and Hearthflame. Both of those Pokemon will be scared of the fact that I have Ivy Cudgel, but on top of that, they won't be able to break through anything on my team quite as fast as we can break through their team, simply because they won't be able to have access to the Terra. On top of that, Terra Rock on Cornerstone does actually change our ability from Sturdy to give us a defense boost, and it gets rid of our grass typing. So this actually is pretty significant for a couple of reasons. The first being that it does actually make us weak to grass moves from Hearthlane, whereas normally they are neutral because of our grass rock typing. However, with that defense boost, we actually do take a lot of hits very well. And on top of that, if our opponent decided to go for a fire type move, which is neutral to us before Terra and resisted after Terra, we take that even better because again, resisted plus we get that 50% defense boost. The other thing is, of course, the defense boost is important versus a Pokemon like Staraptor or Rhyperior, both of which are Pokemon that will need the Terra if they want to go toe-to-toe with Cornerstone, but are still afraid of the fact that we can just smack them and potentially take them out if they decide not to Terra. Now within DD, we do have Light Screen. This is because the only moves that we can't redirect are from the Flutter Mane because they are spread moves. So we do have Light Screen. A Helping Hand also changes the math on a couple of these attacks, wherein if we decide not to use the Terra on Ogerpon, a Helping Hand Ivy Cudgel is just as strong as a Terra Rock Ivy Cudgel, which is super nice. It also means that in certain scenarios where we don't have Tailwind set up, or if our opponent does have the speed advantage, we can make use of the fact that we do still have Sturdy intact potentially, and still be able to get those one-hit KOs. We are also running Psychic as our opponent only has 2 Dark types, neither of which I'm honestly all that threatened by. Persian is a support Pokemon that Adalov has not used all season, and it's not very good, especially into Indeedee, just because of the Psychic terrain blocking its Fake Out. But on top of that, it doesn't even hurt Indeedee at all with a Foul Play, because we are so physically weak. So Indeedee can kind of just sit in front of it and allow partners to go to town. And the other Dark type is, of course, Bisharp, which can actually hurt Indeedee if given a boost, whether that be through Swords Dance or Defiant. Neither of which I'm honestly too concerned about. Remember, we are running Low Kick on Cornerstone, but you do also have a dedicated fighting type specifically for that Pokemon. But of course, Hariyama is just a good Pokemon in general. So good news for Indeedee there. Next up, we do have Alcremie. Alcremie is super physically bulky because aside from Flutter Mane, our opponent's team is actually really physical. Decorate's actually really good in this matchup on any of our 3 offensive threats. It's really good into Iron Crown for the same reason it was good into Dale. Our Iron Crown is Speed Booster this week, so although it will be slower than a Speed Booster Flutter Mane, with Terra Steel, it can block those ghost type attacks that would normally take us out, and hopefully be faster than the rest of our opponent's team, and with a +2 boost, Expanding Force or Tachyon Cutter is going to be able to really hurt at his team. Of course, we are also Calm Mind, so we do have a backup plan there. We are also running Light Screen on Alcremie for the same reason that we mentioned on Indeedee. And then this Pokemon is also running Romavale so that we can block things like Taunt from Illumise as well as Encore. It might actually have niche application here, and we might just use Alcremie for that reason. Next up, we have Hariyama. This is Flame Orb Guts. Pretty standard stuff here. Hariyama is actually really fast and really offensive this week, kind of as a switch up to Ogerpon. However, the benefit for Hariyama is it does have a spread move in Terraground Earthquake. Now, Terraground Earthquake is actually pretty solid into our opponent's team, aside from Staraptor, of course, which already doesn't like the fact that we have Cornerstone. So if we show off, for example, in Game 1 that we are very Cornerstone and Iron Crown focused, they decide to drop Staraptor, Hariyama becomes even better in the match. On top of that, it does also have really good coverage moves. Close Combat, obviously, strongest fighting move, and does threaten to one-hit KO just about everything. And then Heavy Slam does take care of that Flutter Mane, as For a super bulky Flutter main, Earthquake actually does come a bit short, even with the Terra Ground. But still, obviously, our preferred, as our opponent only has one immunity. Two immunities because Oricorio and Staraptor, but very few resists, which is obviously really solid. Next up, like I said, we have Iron Crown. This is a booster speed, pretty standard set here. We are also Calm Mind with this Iron Crown set. It's more so just to show that Iron Crown can function without Indeedee or without Alchemy if I decide to not bring either of them. For example, if we wanted to go Talonflame plus 3 offensive Pokemon. This does give us a ton of options in that Iron Crown being able to set up gives us a Steel and Psychic move that threatens to one-hit KO any Pokemon on our opponent's team. Physically defensive speaking, aside from Hearthflame, Iron Crown actually does match up pretty well into our opponent's team. And then especially defensively after a Terra, it also matches up pretty well into our opponent's team. Obviously some caveats being that Rhyperior can hit it with a super effective ground move, but the trade-off is those Pokemon are a lot slower and tend to have really low special defense, which means that it might not even require a Calm Mind boosted attack in order to break through those. But we do still have that Calm Mind boost available to us. Now the final Pokemon is, in my opinion, the most important Pokemon here. We have a Covert Cloak Annihilated Love, which is Talonflame. We are Terra Dark so that we can dodge things like the Prankster Taunts and Encores from Illumise. Tailwind, Feather Dance, and Dual Wing Beat are all Gale Wings boosted, and does basically mean if our opponent ignores us, we do still get our priority flying type attacks, although we are already faster than most of our opponent's team, aside from something like Fluttermane if it really wants to speed out. But aside from that, Tailwind, of course, really good speed control, allows Cornerstone and Hariyama to do all of the things they want to do. Feather Dance is also really good in this matchup because Talonflame defensively matches up really great into everything not named Rhyperior, and even against Rhyperior, a Feather Dance does make that Pokemon incapable of OHKOing us. However, just because that Pokemon can't OHKO us does not mean that we should ignore it. In those situations, we probably are going to have to either ignore it, force it to use the Terra because of Cornerstone, and just KO all the partners and hope that our back Pokemon can take care of it. Or we will have to take care of it in lead, just so that Talonflame can continue to be as annoying as possible. Our final move is also Feint. This is because, especially since Cornerstone is a single target attacker, we want to be able to break through Protects. Now, Ada doesn't normally run Protect, but on key Pokemon such as Fluttermane, after a Terra, or for example, something like the Hearthflame, being able to break through that Protect is really awesome, as it allows us to basically pick off threats regardless of whether or not Ada wants to keep them around for an additional turn. And it really just allows us to play a much more aggressive game. If, for example, he becomes more Rhyperior centered, then all this turns into is just leading Iron Crown and using our Tachyon Cutters to really break through that Pokemon. But yeah, that is the team that we're going to bring. I'm feeling pretty good about this. Like I said, Cornerstone feels like an absolute game wrecker. But we do have other really strong offensive threats in the matchup, as well as, in my opinion, the best support Pokemon in the playoffs. So yeah, we will see how this works out, and good luck to our opponent. Alright, we have made it into the match. Let's see what Ada has brought. Big thing to note here is that there is no Rhyperior, which is honestly really good for our Ogerpon strategy. Let's see what sets he's brought. Alright, so we do see, obviously, the standard Ogerpon Hearthflame set. Horn Leech is actually the Grass-type move of choice, which is important because that does mean that he cannot OHKO our Ogerpon even after a Terra. He requires a Terra Fire plus Wood Hammer in order to OHKO a Terra Rock Ivy Cudgel, or a Terra Rock Cornerstone specifically. We also have a Booster Energy Terra Steel Fluttermane, Shadow Ball, Moonblast, Dark Pulse is the final move, obviously for a Pokemon like Heat. No Spread Roof, which is notable. We have a Covert Cloak, Prankster Meowstic with Expanding Force, Dark Pulse, Sunny Day, and Imprison. Imprison obviously to stop us from using our own Expanding Force versus the Meowstic. Considering in this instance. And we have a Choice Scarf Staraptor with Reckless instead of Intimidate. Big thing to note because without Intimidate, both Hariyama and Ogerpon are going to be really hard to slow down. And then we have a Terra Dragon Marvel Scale Milotic. This is obviously to try and take less physical damage with the Burn and the Marvel Scale. Hypnosis is notable. Sharp with the Eviolite, Throat Chop, Aerial Ace, Stone Edge. Alright. So this is very notable for a couple of reasons, meaning we are actually in a really good spot. First of all, our opponent does require Terra on multiple Pokemon if they want to try to beat our Ogerpon, and using said Terra does make them a little bit more susceptible to some of our best Pokemon here. So I'm going to stick to our standard lead of Ogerpon and Talonflame. Ogerpon obviously matches up really well into everything not named Milotic or Terra Steel Fluttermane, and even that Pokemon doesn't love seeing us. After a Terra Steel, it should take these moves a lot better. If we look at a bulky special attack boosting Fluttermane with Terra Steel. This is our Cornerstone. With a Terra Rock. Ivy Cudgel is still a 2-hit KO, and Fluttermane cannot OHKO us here. So that is obviously pretty good. Let's also go ahead and run the Hariyama in the back. It's got really good coverage into just about everything here. Obviously without the Terra, it is pretty susceptible to the Staraptor. That is not the end of the world, as we have been saying. Now, another Pokemon that I do like is Iron Crown. I do think that Indeedee is also really solid in the matchup, as our opponent only has one Pokemon that is immune to it, and it is weak to both of our attackers. Plus, Light Screen is actually really solid, as aside from Staraptor, Ogerpon, and Bisharp, all of these Pokemon attack on the special side, so Light Screen is super helpful. And then Helping Hand does mean that certain moves like the Terra Rock Ivy Cudgel can pick off the Fluttermane, even if it goes for the Terra Steel, if we get a little bit of chip damage on that Pokemon with like Dual Wing Beat on Talonflame. So this is definitely a spot where I would consider the Indeedee also makes it so if we lose our speed control and we're down to Hariyama, we do have the ability to redirect and give that Pokemon some extra space to go for what it wants to. So I'm going to go ahead and actually pick Indeedee here. Let's see what Ada wants to lead here. We got Cornerstone Talonflame versus Milotic Ogerpon. Pretty good lead for us there. Let's go ahead and bring up Hearthflame. So if we are up against all-out offense, no Terra is required. If we bring up Hearthflame, mixed stats, it would have to be near max physical bulk in order to code. Milotic, bulky Milotic still takes a ton of damage from Power Whip, so it will require. Let's go ahead and click. We've got a ton of options here. We can actually go for the Spiky Shield here. I also like potentially going for the Feather Dance on the Hearthflame this turn is to scout for which one of these Pokemon wants to go for Terra. We can also go for a dual Wing Beat onto this Milotic, that it's in range. If this Pokemon goes for the Terra Dragon, by the way, the Ivy Cudgel does still have a likely chance to 2-hit KO. Actually is guaranteed because this is a Flame Orb Milotic rather than a Leftovers Milotic. This is also max physical bulk. Not running that physical bulk, that is obviously a problem for them. There is only Muddy Water to worry about here, and we are running a pretty bulky Talonflame here. So Muddy Water from this Pokemon should not KO us. It would require a club in order to do so. Go dual Wing Beat into the slot here. It is Spiky Shield from the Ogerpon. Dual Wing Beat comes out. Decent damage onto the Milotic, who does go for that Muddy Water, and we are able to survive that. Now let's go ahead and go for the Ivy Cudgel into that Hearthflame slot. If we bring back up Cornerstone, without Terra, Muddy Water does not do enough damage to us. Tailwind Ivy Cudgel here. Spiky Shield looks like it's going to fail from the Hearthflame, as we actually get put to sleep by that Hypnosis. Okay, Staraptor going to come out here. We're in a decent spot here, honestly. We have the Tailwind up, so we have not slept yet for a turn. So what we can do here is actually go ahead and bring in we bring up Staraptor with the Choice Scarf, and we give Reckless the Max Attack, if I had to guess. Bravebird does have a chance to OHKO if it's at minus. Just barely misses. Just barely gets a 2-hit KO. So we can go ahead and go for the Spiky Shield here. And then I think Feather Dance does come out. It's close combat actually, meaning that Muddy Water misses the Talon, and we have an accuracy drop. Alright, let's go ahead and go for Ivy Cudgel here into the Raptor. Here I'm going to go ahead and switch to DD. Stay asleep with that one, as Staraptor finally takes out Ogerpon. Muddy Water connects. Ariyama here. We should probably be slower than a Choice Scarf Staraptor. Let's go ahead and bring up my Milotic again with the Marble Scale. It's the Flame Orb with Terra Dragon. Yama. It does look like actually Hariyama can take out the Milotic from this range after we get our burn. So let's go ahead and go for Protect, and I'm actually going to go for Psychic into the Staraptor here. Okay, Close Combat comes out, doesn't do very much into Ndidi, whose Psychic does take out the Staraptor. Muddy Water connects. Alright, Tailwind peters out there. as Fluttermane going to be the switch here. And now we can go ahead and go for the Heavy Slam and the Follow Me here. So our opponent has not used the Terra, so this is a position where obviously they could in fact go for it. I actually like the switch being Terra Ground Earthquake plus switch to Talonflame. Now this will not take out the Milotic, but it has a really good chance to take out non-bulky Fluttermane, which this could be. But it could also be a non-bulky Fluttermane, in which case, whether it Terras or not, it will die. So let's go ahead and switch in Talonflame here. Terra Ground comes out as Protect, actually. Going to come out Hypnosis into the Talonflame. As a crit actually comes out, so Milotic will go down to its own burn. And that is definitely the game there. Moonblast, unable to take out the Hariyama as Earthquake comes out. And it does actually take out that Fluttermane, which tells me that it's not the bulky set. Alright, let's go ahead and get into game number 2. I think this is pretty interesting for a couple of reasons. The first one being that it seems like our opponent was actually ready for the Ogerpon switch up. We didn't really get to see how bulky that Milotic was, because it did take a crit. In that first game, I'm going to go ahead and stick to the same lead. I think Ndidi is still incredible in this matchup because of its ability to actually threaten decent damage on Milotic and everything not named Bisharp. And honestly, I do kind of like the idea of Iron Crown here. I think that even without the extra Tailwind support, the fact that it's not super threatened to be O-code by Fluttermane after a Terra is really nice, and knowing that our opponent doesn't have Intimidate means that we're not forced to Terra at any point with our Ogerpon, meaning that it's much more available for the Iron Crown. So let's go ahead and choose Iron Crown here. Switch ups that our opponent can make, I think they definitely have to lean harder into the solution that is Milotic. It's really decent in the matchup, aside from obviously the Ogerpon. I think the big issue for the Milotic is just that the best pressure that it puts on is the Hypnosis, which is obviously inconsistent. Aside from that, it just doesn't threaten enough damage in the game. I'm trying to think. Meowstic might be another switch up, given that they know we have Psychic Terrain. It is actually the Bisharp switch here. So obviously Stone Edge can come out here, and that would be pretty devastating. Aerial Ace and Throat Chop. I believe that neither of those are going to be really good into Cornerstone, even especially if we Terra. But Bisharp, Aerial Ace, Throat Chop. Throat Chop is actually pretty strong. Let's see if we give you Max Attack Adamant. That is a 2-hit KO. I think I'm just gonna make a really simple and easy play. I'm gonna Tailwind and Ivy Cudgel. This Staraptor cannot protect. So let's just go ahead and take this Pokemon out. and Bisharp is forced to Terra here if it does not want to lose to low kick. Ivy Cudgel comes out and does take out the Star Raptor as Stone Edge takes out the Talonflame. I really like the idea of going into Iron Crown here, as we threaten to basically set up Calm Minds here. I'm going to go ahead and go for Ivy Cudgel into the Hearthflame. I'm going to Terra Steel Calm Mind here. Either of these Pokemon attacking into Iron Crown is not a big deal, and with a Calm Mind boost, there's very little that can actually stop Iron Crown. Okay, Terra Steel comes out as Calm Mind happens. Ivy Cudgel connects, takes out the Hearthflame as Throat Chop does connect. Now we can go ahead and go for... we have a couple of options here. So we are +1 Iron Crown, Speed Booster, and we're Terra Steel. With +1 versus Flutter Mane. We said that they are most likely not bulky, so let's go ahead and give them the Sash set. Tachyon Cutter does definitely OHKO if we give them Terra Steel, however. Tachyon Cutter still has a chance to... Actually, a Tachyon Cutter plus Ivy Cudgel does always grab that knockout, so... we can actually pretty easily scout Protects and Terras here by just clicking double Protect. So it is Terra Steel there. And it is Shadow Ball and Throat Chop. Okay. So let's go ahead and go for low kick. Bisharp should always drop to that. And then we can go ahead and go for Tachyon Cutter. Okay, it's double Protect as our opponent stalls out the Tailwind. And we can make the same play. In order to keep Bisharp alive, he does have to KO Ogerpon here. And then Tachyon Cutter does just under 50%, as Throat Chop does that much. And based on this, also Shadow Ball does not get the KO from this range. So we can go ahead and go for the Follow Me and the Tachyon Cutter here. Dark Pulse does 40% as Tachyon Cutter comes out and just misses the KO. Throat Chop will finally get that knockout though. And now we can actually see that our opponent is reading us pretty well here. And Shadow Ball will finally get the KO, so we are going to a game number 3. Alright. Obviously, really good lead for us with the Ogerpon there. I don't really think that there's anything that really needs to change from the Ogerpon in lead. Grabbing 2 KOs is really hype. And I think we're going to go ahead and bring in... Indeedee is obviously still really strong. I think our opponent is still pretty likely to bring the Bisharp. I think it would be completely fine for us to bring either of these 2 Pokemon. I'm going to choose Hariyama though. Hariyama is really good for the Bisharp, but it's also pretty decent into the Milotic if they decide to go back to that. I am not too worried about what my opponent really wants to do with a lot of their lower tier Pokemon. It's basically just if we can position our Ogerpon or our Hariyama correctly under Tailwind in order to make sure that we do outspeed that Flutter Mane in key positions. Now, there was definitely a position in that second game where a Helping Hands Tachyon Cutter would have knocked out the Flutter Main, meaning that we would have had a much easier time there. Alright, here we are in a pretty decent position. Again, we can go ahead and go for the low kick and the feint on this turn. Now, Flutter Main can outspeed both Pokemon here. However, it doesn't threaten a one-hit KO on either Pokemon here. So just removing the Bisharp is really what we want to do here. Feint comes out, no protects to break, as low kick just barely misses taking out the Bisharp here. And now we are in a bit of a tough spot here. If we check the Flutter Mane Terra Steel versus Ogerpon, let's go ahead and bring up Low Kick. Power Whip is our strongest move. If we go Terra Rock, Ivy Cudgel becomes our strongest move. Let's go ahead and go for a Spiky Shield. I think Terra Fire is going to be the preferred here. I believe also Psychic from Indeedee. It's a roll to put Flutter Mane in range of the Terra Rock Ivy Cudgel. This Pokemon does have Dark Pulse. We do know that Dark Pulse plus the Throat Chop does take out Indeedee. Let's go ahead and go for the Ivy Cudgel into the Bisharp. Let's go for Low Kick. And then I think what I want to go ahead and do here is a Light Screen for our Ogerpon here. Staraptor actually going to be the switch here as we get a free Light Screen. Okay, definitely important there. We can go ahead and go for the Ivy Cudgel here. Into the Staraptor would have been really nice on the switch, of course. Now, of course, I do think that it is important that we get this Bisharp off the field. So I think what is more important actually is I'm going to actually click Low Kick and follow me here. Okay, Ogerpon actually going to switch here as Follow Me comes out. Brave Bird hits, doesn't quite take out though, as a Low Kick does just enough. Ivy Cudgel can come out now. We should definitely take out this Staraptor here as we go for Follow Me. Okay, Spiky Shield actually comes out as Follow Me. Brave Bird goes into the Indeedee. So we get a correct read there as we take out the Staraptor. And now Hariyama can come back in. Alright, in this situation we definitely go for the Ivy Cudgel here. And I think this just comes down to if we live a Moonblast with the Light Screen up. The previous Moonblast did 60%. So there is a chance actually that we live this. I think what I'd rather do is go for a Spiky Shield and Terra Ground Earthquake. This gives us a better chance, at least. And because it's no bulk flutter main, Hariyama bring back in, not burned yet. Earthquake, yeah. We don't even need the Terra Ground. And if we bring up Hearthflame, even if you're all out offense, Hornleech does not ever get that KO. Terra Ground. Hornleech actually can get that KO if you are. So let's see if he gets the correct read here. Spiky Shield comes out as Terra Ground. Moonblast goes into the Protect. Ivy Cudgel actually into the Terra Ground. Earthquake comes out. Does actually take out the Flutter Mane. Alright, and then Bisharp going to come out. Let's go ahead and go for Ivy Cudgel here into the Hearthflame. So this might come down to a Ogerpon speed tie. And let's go for the close combat here. Let's see if he is max speed Ogerpon or not. If not, then we might be able to win this game. Ivy Cudgel comes out, so we do win the speed tie, as Aerial Ace fails to take out Cornerstone, and Close Combat does take out GG's. That was way closer than it should have been. Adalov played absolutely incredible to make it come down to the wire like that. But your Manchester Bewears are able to move on in a 3-game set. I hope you are less nervous than I am, but that was an incredible match and does mean that we are moving on to the semifinals where we get a rematch with the Infernal Infernapes and Big Bot. So hopefully you all did enjoy. Make sure you keep cheering on your Manchester Bewears. Make sure you give a lot of love to Adalov as he played a great season. But this is where it ends and your Bewears will continue on. And I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.